All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Hello. My name is Philip Kahn Polly. I am the Policy and Practices Director for Respectability, and I am so delighted to be here and with you today, virtually. This week marks the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and that has been a lot of time and a lot of change in 31 years. And I think we all can agree that we've witnessed a lot of change in just the past year of the world of COVID, pandemic, virtual learning for students with disabilities, Zoom meetings, remote work, mask mandates, and now vaccinations. But in reflecting on this year of change, I really want to look ahead. 31 is not a big anniversary. There's no special diamond jubilee, but really, it's a chance for all of us in the disability community to look ahead to a world that is going to be different profoundly because of COVID, because of the past year of crisis, and really grapple with what does the future look like and how can we make a more inclusive future, and we're going to as a nation and as the world facing a more inclusive future due to the hard work of leaders like Jim Sinocchi, and who is our special guest for today. Jim heads the Office of Disability Inclusion at JPMorgan Chase, and he is truly a thought leader in the space of inclusion in disability. He has been working for decades to make really workplaces inclusive for people with disabilities, transforming business culture. But he definitely has a lot of lived experience, but more important than that, he has a very clear vision of how to make accessibility a reality, how to improve accommodations, and most importantly for today, lessons on inclusion for the post-COVID world. And so, Jim, I am so delighted to be here with you. I will be running our slide deck. How this will go is, now that I've introduced you, Jim, you'll talk through your slides.
Okay.
Audience members, you'll be able to ask us questions in either the chat box or the Q&A box. After we run through Jim's slides, I will open it up with a few questions that I have burning in my heart for Jim. Then we'll open it to audience questions and get that fireside chat going. So with that, I'm going to open up and start the screen share. And welcome to the webinar today, Jim. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing okay, except for a cold. So please forgive me. And I caught the cold over the weekend flying back from Washington State, and it was a good thing. I'll open it with this. I chair the Accommodations Air Carrier Act Board, and we're looking at trying to make airline travel more conducive for people with disabilities. Basically, to be blunt, have us fly in our wheelchairs in airplanes. So we spent the day with the Boeing engineers and talked about this, and we did see a demo of a seating program where they could board a wheelchair rider, power chair or manual. You stay in your chair. You don't have to get lifted and go through all that rigmarole. And the seat slides over another seat, and they dock you right into the side of that. Now, what a vision is that to change the paradigm in terms of people with disabilities. And because I work at Chase and was nominated to the board, and as chair was a gift, I just wanted to be a board member. We have the opportunity to influence other businesses and people to make our lives more easily available and accessible to things that we want to do. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to fly in our wheelchairs today in the 21st century. So I'll open with that, which that's probably the most exciting thing you'll hear from me today. So thank you very much for listening. And again, I'm sorry for my my cold. Next slide, please. What I try to do at the firm is my basic job is this, and I know everybody talks about the ADA, one of the most important pieces of legislation that the United States passed for people with disabilities. However, what is more important is our ability to take advantage of the products and services and the rights in a world that's not barrier-free for people with disabilities. And what I try to do at the firm is not only make my bank accessible, and I'll talk a little bit about that, but how do we change the culture in an organization? How do we get people to see disabled people as part of humanity. We're just not disabled people. We're human beings that had something bad happen to us. I haven't met one disabled person that being blind was the greatest thing since sliced bread that he or she faced. So what I try to do is make able-bodied people feel a little more comfortable about what I do as a disabled person. Now, some of my colleagues in this space disagree with me. They say they should just understand it, get it done with. But in my interactions in the corporate world, I worked for IBM for 39 years and at Chase for 5. So that puts me almost 45 years in the corporate environment. And I had to deal with more able-bodied people than I had to deal with disabled people. And what that tells you is that I've been able to work in an able-bodied organization, even though I'm disabled. And that's what we all have to strive to do. Yes, people can take it upon themselves to learn a little bit more about this space, but I feel like I'm an ambassador for the disabled. So when they get to know me and see, as some of you may, the slide here is a picture of my wife and I on the left taking a boat ride up here in Massachusetts in Plymouth County. In the middle, there's a picture of people surfing, which illustrates where I broke my neck body surfing in Puerto Rico on Condado Beach. And on the right is a trip I took with my daughter's graduation of law school, my wife and my son, who works for the federal government and now in private. And so the picture depicts a person that can do some of the things that able-bodied can do or have done in the past. But I still have to raise children. I still stayed married to my spouse. We're married now 33 years. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go on. But I am me, and I have things in common with you. It's not my disability. It's my marriage. It's raising children. It's my values. It's my church. It's my politics. It's all of the same things that you have. And we, as people with disabilities, have to understand that and help other people understand that as well. Next slide, please. So this slide is called Reservations and Attitudes. And the picture depicts a waiter taking a meal order with a woman on the right and a man on the left. And this brings me to the story about what this means. My wife and I were coming back from Canada where her relatives live, and we crossed the border, the Canadian border, finally getting into the United States and down to New York. And we stopped for a meal at a local restaurant near the Canadian border. And we get in there, my son was about 6 years old. My daughter was about 8 or 9. The waiter walks up to us and looks at my wife and say, hello, everyone. How can I help you? And ma'am, what would you like to eat? And my wife ordered her food. And then he went to ask my daughter. She ordered her food. And then he turned to my son and he ordered his food. Then he turned back to my wife as I was sitting at the table and said, what does he want to eat? So for those of you that don't know me, I'm a C5, C6 quadriplegic. I'm paralyzed. I was driving at the time, but this guy completely ignored me. And my wife, as brilliant as she is, and you can't pass a trick on her, she said to him, you better ask him because he's paying the bill. And so the attitudes that people have towards people with disabilities is either ignorance, they just don't understand, or they haven't had the common courtesy to ask, well, how should I dress you, sir? Well, I said, talk to me like you talk to anybody else, right? So this is some of the things that we talk to our managers and employees about at Chase Manhattan Bank as we get people comfortable talking, working with, and for people with disabilities. Next slide. This slide shows, and my slides are pretty sophisticated. There are 3 little green men with big eyes and red suits there. And the title of the slide says Alien Encounters. And so what happens to able-bodied people is that when they meet a person with a disability, if they don't know enough about disability inclusion, they don't know what to do or say. So to them, we're aliens. They don't know if they see a guy in a wheelchair, how to shake hands or pound my fist. How do you help a person who's blind? How do you get the attention of a person who's deaf? And so we are aliens to able-bodied people. And look, it's not all their fault. Some of the times they don't know what to do or say. They may have never met anyone like me or like anyone else who's disabled. So I give them a little credit for that. And it was so telling one time when I took my son and my daughter and my wife to the mall when they were younger. I think it was one of the first or second times my son was out with me in public. And as we were walking to the mall, he turned to his mom and I and said, "Mom, why is everybody staring at us?" And it was the first time he was out with his dad in a wheelchair because I work 5 days a week, got to go out with the kids and the wife. And it was telling that he noticed that. And he didn't notice it when he was going out with his mom and his sister that they stared at him like that. So these are telling signs that people still don't understand the disability community or are not comfortable with. And I point this out to you to say, don't get angry with this. Think of this as a point of inflection where you could help people understand, what you do. And go to the next slide, please. And when people sort of ask me about this, they say, "Jim, what do you say when you meet a person with a disability?" And I've done this on stage with thousands of people. I say, "How about hello? Would you like a cup of coffee? Can I help you to your table? How was your drive over?" So that's what you talk about. You don't say, "How were you injured? Were you born like that? Are you blind or deaf or all?" I mean, so you've got to be a coach for some of these people now. And another thing I've learned is that if you were a jerk before your disability, you're going to be a jerk after your disability. So some people just don't get it. So the slide that I'm looking at now depicts a bunch of people around representing our world at JPMorgan Chase. I've got women, I've got people from India, I've got people on the autism spectrum, I got people who are deaf, I got people who are blind, I've got people who have a mental illness, I have people that wear braces. Now, this chart depicts people with just headshots. So when you look at them with just headshots, like on a baseball card, you just see a happy face of people who work here. It doesn't depict disability, but these people are working around the world with disabilities, even in leadership positions. There's a young man there in the middle of the slide who's on the autism spectrum. He's a vice president, he's a leader, and he drives our autism program in both Europe and in APAC. The guy is brilliant, but you couldn't tell by looking at him at this picture. There's a woman in here that's a quadriplegic, and she's an HR executive. There's another woman that flew for the first time with wayfaring technology about a year ago when we gave it to her, and it was the first time she took a flight from New York to Tampa Bay to do a conference at one of the conferences. And so you could see these people at work doing things everybody does, and these are people, what the slide says, a sampling of our employees with disabilities driving results across the globe. All these people are either middle managers or vice presidents, and they're very, how should I say, talented. Next slide. So this chart is a chart that has 4 oranges on a slide in a white background. And the 4 ovals there start with attitude, accessibility, accommodations, and assimilation. And those are what I call the 4 A's. At IBM, I had the 3 A's there, attitude, accessibility, and accommodation. When I came to Chase, I developed a program with these 4. And what these 4 terms do is help make an inclusive organization for work for people with disabilities. And under there are definitions. And these definitions can be found in the dictionary. The problem with disability inclusion is everybody wants to get scientific or talk about this in medical terms. And when you do that, people get nervous, they get alienated, and they wonder if they're going to catch something from us. And so when we have this attitude, accessibility, accommodations, and assimilation, it helps the company create a culture that works. With attitude is, how do you welcome people who are different at your firm? If they're Black, white, Hispanic, LGBT, whatever, disabled, what's the attitude or the culture of the firm that welcomes everybody that are qualified to work here? Accessibility, as you all know, has to do with technology, the ability to go into a building free of barriers. And our real estate team is one of the best at putting in ramps, braille on elevator doors. We are now even trying to put in technology in buildings that would hook up to hearing aids so that people can connect to audio, video, and all that kind of stuff. That takes time, it takes money, but this firm is up to the task. Accommodations you're probably most familiar with is, how do we make our buildings accessible? How do you treat your people who are managers or executives in terms of getting accessible cars for them when they have to go on trips or on a plane or go give a talk someplace in the city or elsewhere? How do you make those accommodations? And while I'm there, I could tell you that we've had, since 2018, we've delivered 30,000 requests for accommodations at this bank. That includes furniture and other things. In this past May, we set up a technology accommodations team that is exclusively being set up to deliver technology accommodations around the world. For the last 3 years, we were, going to Joe and Mary and trying to get that done, which wasn't efficient, which we knew. But now we ponied up this team of 7 people. So we have a fast track to deliver accommodations that work for people who are disabled. And assimilation means, how do you bring in people who are different and get them to work in a culture together? How do you look at your disabled people as managers? Do you have disabled people that are managing in your business? Why aren't people with disabilities encouraged to go into management training programs, which we try to do here? Why don't we hire people with disabilities that are managers? We do that here as well. So people with disabilities have leadership potential, and some of us on the autism or the neurodiverse spectrum, for example, outperform people in technology in doing certain jobs. So when you look at this space with different eyes, you'll find a whole nother landscape of humanity where we could help people with disabilities going forward to be productive, to be leaders, and to fend for themselves, to be self-supporting. Next slide. When we talk about my Office of Disability Inclusion, these are 3 concentric circles there, but my office touches everything: HR, diversity, legal, education and training, real estate, the C-suite, where the top executives manage our business, health and medical, finance, IT, marketing, media, community outreach, internal and external and internal communication, recruiting, government programs and security, and doing things like I am now. So my office is as prolific as any office around. I think it's amazing that we could do this, and people on my staff have disabilities, including me, and we have able-bodied people as well. But I have no limits to what I could do at the firm. When Jamie Dimon interviewed me for the job as part of my interview process, so I talked to him for about 40 minutes, and he said, "Jim, I want you to fix everything you see. Go fix everything in the firm." And with leadership like that, how could you not escape the power of going out there, because you've got people behind you to get this mission done. Next slide. On this slide are some examples of what I showed on the other chart regarding attitude, accessibility, accommodations, and assimilation. So under attitude, we talk about media interviews, speaking opportunities. We talk about a firm-wide policy on disability inclusion that I wrote for the firm. And when I wrote the policy for the firm, I wrote it for the managers, because the managers needed backup to say, if I'm going to hire this guy, Jim Sinocchi, who's a quadriplegic, and he fails, how does that make me look? But our policy stated that if we could do this stuff right, managers don't have to worry about that. Manage disabled people as you manage anyone else. And if they need accommodations, we'll do that too. So we started to get into the roots of the firm to make sure that this was an inclusive company. We also have resources, employee manager guides, videos, internet newsletters. We have BRG groups as well in our company. Accommodations, I talked about that a little bit. We have a live captioning team. We have My Accessibility Hub that is in charge of delivering accommodations around the world. And our assistive technology and real estate teams are terrific. They also produce for us access badges. So I wear, like on my watch, a wristband that lets me go through all the gates, like when I have to open a door automatically because I can't use my hands. So I have a bracelet, I push it against the pad, and the doors open automatically. And these are what our teams are doing there. And that wasn't there before I got there, but they figured out how to do this. Assimilation, we talked a little bit about that, is how do you bring in people who are different and give them the same opportunities you give your able-bodied population? And so when you look at this holistically, I think we got most of the numbers right. We got most of the access issues right. And we just got to continue trying to deliver these results. Next slide. This slide just talks about the numbers. Our captioning team increased its services by 224% year over year. What that means is we got a lot of people who use captioning. And we have our video studios putting captioning on our videos, as many as we can. More than 240 employees are on the spectrum, working in 40 different roles on the Autism at Work program. 240. And some of those guys outperform able-bodied people in the jobs they do. We have a This Is Me campaign around our mental illness, mental health journeys. More than 90 employees across the globe have shared their mental health story. And you know, when we do that, executives have told me that the firm gets smaller. It means because it's more about the people, and it accentuates what the people do in a high, intense environment. So I think it's good stuff all around. And I talked about the 30,000 accommodations that we handled over the last 4 years. Next slide, please. And I call technology the great equalizer because like you or me, we couldn't do half the things we do without accessible technology. And technology is giving us more freedom. So we have a central accommodations team that does it. We have an employee accessibility team that if we deliver accommodation, so for example, we delivered an accommodation to a managing director who was blind or near blind. And he didn't even know that there was a backlit keyboard on the market. So even though you're disabled doesn't mean you know all the technology. And what we found out when our techie went over to his home during COVID, the tech said, you know, have you ever had a backlit keyboard? He goes, no, I never heard of it. So we ordered him one. Now because he had slight vision progress. And when he got that, it changed his life. He could see the backlit keyboard and type at home and get his job done. And so we're finding new things are happening with this intersectionality of the able-bodied and the disabled in our business, and bringing people together. And our interpreters and captioners are doing the same thing. We have people who are deaf could reserve a captioner to listen to a meeting, to go understand what's in the video if it isn't captioned. And so we try to provide all those services for our people. We have a long way to go, but those are some of the major milestones that we had done there. Next slide. For you managers out there or people who want to work in a firm like JPMorgan Chase, the slide shows a picture of some people working, and the 80-20 rule is on this thing. So 80% of us with disabilities send in bios that don't have our disability on it. Because we know that when we send in a bio, a resume that says we're disabled, the managers throw them out. So people with disabilities send in a bio without that, and they say all the wonderful things they can do. When they send it in that they are disabled, the same person that sent in the first bio that got accepted gets rejected. And this was told to me by numerous people with disabilities and even recruiters. So for managers, when you get a bio with a person with a disability, understand that that person has 80% of the skills that you need. That's why the bio went to you. And with able-bodied people and disabled people, you have to teach them the 20%. Everybody has that 20% gap. Even when I took this job at Chase, I didn't have 100% of the skills I needed to be here. I had to acquire them here. So that's the 80-20 rule, and never forget it. So you can continue sending in your bios, but I was honest. I told them who I was, what I needed, and the bank says, and I knew they were committed when they said, we'll get you whatever you need. Sometimes they gave me too much. I had to send it back. I said, I can't use that trackball miles. It doesn't work for me. So the idea is, but the spirit was there. And so that's what I love about working here in places like IBM. Next slide. This slide is a slide where we have a person getting the disability award. What is this? ABLE, the ABLE Community Magazine. And we submit our leaders here for awards, and 2 or 3 of our people have been featured in the Disability Inclusion Magazine and talk about what they do and showcase their skills. And so we promote people with disabilities. I probably can't get these people in like the New York Times or Newsweek or even on TV, but I can get them into places where other companies are looking to hire qualified people with disabilities and showcase their skills. And we do that. We do that for our people. And none of our people are embarrassed about this. We just had another young lady that got an award too last month. And so we push people with disabilities the way you see other business leaders and companies get in Fortune magazine and elsewhere, right? So we do that as well. Next slide. This slide just says, talent comes in all sizes, shapes, and forms. If you have the qualification, you can be a leader, a trailblazer, and an incredible team player. All you need is an equal opportunity to prove yourself. I don't want anybody to give me a gift. Don't feel sorry for me. Hire me because you think I'm the best at what I do, and I'm happy to compete with anyone who's trying to get the same job I did. In that job that I told you I got with Chase, they interviewed 100 people. There was one guy that they chose in front of me, and I came in second. And his wife didn't want to work in New York, so I got lucky. But I don't feel bad about that. I feel great that I got the opportunity to perform. And that's what you, with people with disabilities, has to think about. Don't let people put you in a box. Be humble, be aggressive, be smart, have a set of values that you live by. And a lot of people may say a lot of bad things about you, but you want to ignore those people. You can't fight everybody. Live your life as fully as you want. There's no problem with doing that. Be the person you want to be. And with that, I thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Stop my screen share, and we already have a comment from Mara Lynn about how that was a wonderful, an amazing presentation. Well, I would agree. Jim, thank you so much for kind of talking us through everything at such a high level. And I really love the 4 A's that you talk about attitude, access, accommodations, and assimilation. And I really appreciate the opportunities that you are really proving that with the workers, with your employees with disabilities, the work that Chase is doing. We already have we already have a couple of questions in the chat box. We have a Q&A question in the Q&A box. Members of the audience, if you would like to ask a question, drop it in the chat box or put it in the Q&A. But I've got a couple questions I want to talk about first. And I'm really curious, that accommodations piece, Jim, what has reasonable accommodations looked like for Chase in the past year with the pandemic and remote work? And how do you think the accommodations process is going to change in years ahead?
That's a good question. We did place people with disabilities with furniture in their homes or laptops. We did do that. They brought them back afterward. I don't know what we're going to do with the furniture. That becomes a pain in the butt, moving them back and forth. But we did accommodate people to do their jobs at home. And our bank stood up as a reliable bank throughout the pandemic. So people got their money, they got their checks, they got any government program allowances that we could get through our bank. I think the bank did a fantastic job. Going back to work now, they're doing alternate days, alternate seating, trying to figure out how to get around the virus and keeping people safe. And so some things in life impact people with disabilities more, but we suffer the same way as able-bodied people sometimes, right? If you get hit with COVID, whether you're able-bodied or disabled, my catching that could be more dire based on my condition, but a lot of able-bodied people died as well. So I think that the differentiation is there. However, we face the same obstacles, and we have to assure ourselves and people who work with us that we have to make the call for ourselves. Like if I don't want to ride the train because I think I could catch COVID on it, I won't take the train because it's my life at stake. And so you've got to, and it's life or work. And I just got to figure out what I want to do, and it's going to be life. And so I was closed down since last March when I was at the government doing the Air Carrier Act stuff that I was doing, and I hadn't been out since. I've traveled twice by plane this year in the last 3 months to do some business for the bank. I did meetings via Zoom, so we still got the work done with technology.
Gotcha. And that feeds into one of our first audience questions. And just, very briefly, what are some of the ideas, or how are you thinking about accommodating employees who have previously had COVID, or how are you going to kind of plan to deal with the long-term health consequences for those who have experienced this terrible disease?
Well, look, and this is sort of like a differentiation point. Like I work for a large bank. We have a pretty good plan for our people. I'll be honest about that. IBM had one too. But there are a lot of good plans out there that could help you. And the thing that you've got to do first is make sure you have the information you need that works for you. And if you don't want to go out someplace or go in a crowded room or not do, then don't do it. I do things that I want to do. And my wife and I stayed home as much as we could while we try to go see our grandkids or our son and our daughter. We did that, but we were very cautious, and it was very stressful on us. You got to make your own call on that, and don't go out for a lark. I mean, if I don't think now is the time, for example, since it's opening up, to go into a bar and have a few drinks all night with no mask with people you don't know. I think you should wait a couple of months, or at least to the end of the year. So some of this stuff, you've got to make your own decision on. And look, just because we're disabled doesn't mean we don't know how to think or make decisions for ourselves. It's up to you to decide that. If someone tells you to do something and you don't want to do it, then don't do it. Walk away.
Absolutely, and that is that is a very powerful piece of self-advocacy, which I think is really important to always keep in mind. And so I'm curious. I always love that Jim. I always love when you talk about assimilation, because to me, I feel like that is the point at which kind of equity and inclusion work, really transforms the kind of the culture and the attitude of a firm, whether it's a nonprofit organization or a private business. And so I'm really curious. Can you go back and talk a little more about kind of how your workers with disabilities are developing their leadership skills? How are you trying to make sure that you mentioned the magazine profiles, but I'm curious, what are some of the trainings that you think a person with a disability who wants to become a true leader in their job or in their field, what should they do to really put themselves on that path of leadership?
And this goes true with able-bodied, when I was able-bodied or not. You have to ask. No one's going to walk up to you and say, "Hey, Philip, do you want to be a vice president here? Do you want to be president of the company?" That rarely happens unless you're the child of the owner, right? "Johnny, you're going to be the next president of my company." Well, how often does that happen? The idea is that you have to ask and ask what you have to do to get ahead. No manager is going to come up to you and say, "Hey, Jim, I've been watching you there for the last 4 years, and I think you've had done this, and that. You would have gotten ahead, faster." You have to ask, how do I get ahead? What do I need to do that job? What training do I have to take? Ask for the training. And you have to self-propel yourself into leadership. People that go into military and do stuff out of valor, that's one thing. But in the corporate world, it's almost the same thing, but it's a different dynamic. You know, who's the go-getter? Who works more overtime to get the job done? Who calls the manager, say, boss, I see you've got that project going. Can I help you with that? Go and ask. And I did that in my career as an executive. I went from manager to director to corporate director. And so, you know, and all of those steps take time. So that's what I would say that, you know, that's how I think about that.
Gotcha. Thank you. And so, obviously, one of the defining features of the pandemic for so many people was remote work and working from home. And now that more people are getting vaccinated and companies are looking to bring people back into their office, I'm really curious, what do you see as being the future of remote work? Do you think attitudes have changed permanently? Is it just a temporary change? What does remote work look like in the future, do you think?
I think, and I've always liked remote work as an adjunct to meeting people in the office, because when you go out and meet people, you network, you learn more, you get different ideas, you get mentors, you get people that you not only listen to, but you watch how they operate. I mean, you just can't, I mean, I'm sure there are some people that could sit in a room that have PhDs and are brilliant, that can think of things and, wow, I'll buy the patent, and they become gazillionaires. But interacting with people helps you learn more, helps you learn how to deal with people who are different, gives you a chance to see if your ideas are valid. And you could tell a lot by looking at a person rather than just emailing them. You know, they could say this is great over the system, and in at the other side is saying this is really crappy. I'm just telling them it's nice, right? So the idea is a mix of everything is good. And that's how I see it. And I just think you still have to pick your spots. Not everybody finds a good mentor. Not everybody has a good buddy, but it takes time to cultivate friendships and people and understanding. And through that, you get a better idea of equity and even intersectionality in terms of people who are different. Because once you're stuck in your house, you end up having another paradigm that you create by yourself, and it's not healthy all the time.
Definitely. I think that's I know that trying to navigate that challenge is something that a lot of nonprofits and companies are trying to figure out. And we will definitely be seeing a hybrid workplace for a while longer. So we have a question from Bob Lancaster, who's asking about, he mentions how his company doesn't even have an Office of Disability Inclusion, and he was talking about in his Q&A box. He mentions that it speaks to the value and the importance that Chase has put on disability and inclusion, that you have an office like that. He's curious, how many years has the office been around at Chase? And secondary to that, how did you get so many different corporate functions built into the office that you're now running?
Shoot, I don't know. I got lucky. I mean, I'm here 5 years now. So when they hired me, I had retired from IBM after a 39-year career. And I actually told the recruiter that called me, no, I don't want to go back to work. And the recruiter, they said, Jim, please just talk. I said, like, how did you get my name? I had moved to Massachusetts by then when I was in New York. And finally, I told my wife, and I said, Mag, I'm just going to listen to this. I listened through 17 interviews before they hired me. And then I told my wife, Mag, they hired me for the job. They want me to take it. And, if she didn't want to go back down to New York, I would not have gone. And she said to me, Jim, if you take this job, you could help a lot of people. I know it. And that was the impetus. And that lady's been by my side for 33 years, and I trust her with everything. And she was right on this one too.
Well,
but here's the other thing too that I just want to say it before I forget. What we do is not only in the day now in terms of what you see and what I'm doing now, but 3 years ago I was featured in our newspaper magazine at the bank with my service dog Veronique, who passed away about 1.5 years ago. I had her for 11 years, and the paper wrote about what I did, how I did it, and this mother wrote back to me and said, Mr. Sinocchi, I saw your picture in the magazine, and my son saw it, who's disabled. And when I read the story to him about what you were doing, he asked me, he was about 7 years old, she said, and this is about 3 years ago. He said, Mommy, I see that guy in the wheelchair. Does that mean I can go to work someday too? And that just stopped me in my tracks, because it's more than what we do for people now. It's what the children see about their future. If they're sitting in a wheelchair someplace or have braces on or are blind, imagine what they're thinking about their future. And if they could see role models like us on this call doing things, imagine how many other people we could serve better and not let them go through what we went through. Although, I think some of the stuff we go through builds character. But that voice is still in my head today, 4 years later, when I heard that child say that to his mom as she conveyed it to me. It's fascinating.
Gotcha. We have another question from the Q&A box about invisible disabilities and the stigma that's associated with a disability that can't be seen but is very really felt. So I'm curious, how do you handle supporting and addressing those types of accommodations and disability issues in your workplace?
I have another example for that. You know me already. I have an example for everything. A woman came to me when I was first there 2 years. And she visited my office, and, people don't come into my office unless it has to do with disabilities, right? So I knew it was going to be a question about disabilities. So I said, hi, I'm Jim, tell me your name. And I said, whatever you want to talk about, you got to initiate, because I can't ask. Okay, it's not polite. It's not, I can't ask for information that is personal or hidden. And she said that she had a hidden disability, but she didn't want to tell her boss. And I said, why not? And she said to me, I don't want him or her to hold it against me, which was a great point. But then I said to her, I said, look at me. People see me. They know what I am. I'm worse off than you are. Everything worked on her, right? She had a hidden disability, truly. And I said, if you don't tell your manager, how does he or she know what to do or how to help you? And we're trying to create an environment where you will get the help if you need it and not get discriminated against. But that's always a choice to make. And you may get a jerk in the seat that doesn't know what to do. But we, as people with disabilities, as leaders, have to fight that fight for all of us. We can't hide it and then have your child become disabled and your child has to fight that fight. When does it end? It probably never ends, but let's make sure that it doesn't propagate itself and that people tell people. I said, maybe if your manager, suppose your manager has nothing against you, but he didn't know about your inability to do something, don't you think giving him the opportunity to help you would be the right thing to do? And then if he doesn't do it, you escalate to me or whoever you want to escalate. But the idea is, if you say nothing, nothing gets done.
And I think that's where kind of on the other side of that is where, the training for supervisors and managers is so important is, as a person in the chat box is mentioning, it's if a disability is visible, it's much more believable. Well, in that case, then, you need to train your non-disabled managers, your non-disabled supervisors to, basically trust the person and to meet them halfway by, if somebody comes to you saying, I have this disability, I'm disclosing it to you and I need accommodation. Why? The default attitude of the supervisor should be, great, let's get you your accommodation and let's keep you at work and let's keep you as productive as it can be. So it's that give and take. And I think that's again why that idea about assimilating a culture of inclusion and it really transforming a business, transforming an agency, transforming a nonprofit really requires that top to down, bottom to top transformation of inclusion and
that's what I do. I told you I was with the UK people this week. 2 weeks ago, I was training technology people at the bank, and a week after that, we were training people in India, executives, the managing directors, the leadership team. And what I would tell them as managers, I said this before earlier in the call, if you can't get up in front of your people in a staff meeting and talk about disability inclusion, you got a problem, because they'll never come to you for help. And then you're going to wonder why the workload is bad or they can't get the job done. And so you've got to be that inquisitive as a manager. I mean, we used to talk at IBM about good people managers. What does that do? You ask employees about things. How was your day? What's going on? You know, you check in with people. Same thing with people with disabilities. And it just takes some discipline. As a manager, you should want to do that. You know, I touch base with my people as a lot of times because I don't know half the things I should know. They know everything. But the idea is, how do you engage and that's what able-bodied people do. They go into lunch, they go for coffee, they do different things. People with disabilities don't do that all the time. And we've got to learn to do that.
Definitely. And I think it also speaks to the fact that it's, been 31 years since the ADA became law. It is, basically we have a generation that has been born since the law changed, who are, entering the workforce, have, been struggling to keep a job, or,
Right.
are working or have completed their degrees. And also this is why we need more people with disabilities in management and leadership positions, so that that force of change can keep growing and keep driving.
Well, we talked about this, Philip. At one of our board meetings, I wanted a cabinet position in the presidency to have us have a person lead disability inclusion. It's bullshit. It should be there. We've got 70 million people in the United States, 50 to 70 million people with disabilities. That's a huge voting block if we can get them into accessible polls, as in terms of what Jennifer keeps talking about, right? The polling. So, and we talked about this 3 years ago, and it's still not happening. These are easy things to do, but people don't care.
Well, and this is one of those times where, if we're not seeing the leadership we need from the public sector, we can see that maybe the private sector is taking the great leap forward and really pushing on these issues. And that's why we have thought leaders like Jim Sinocchi come and join us for webinars like this. I'm going to put one last invitation to our audience members. Any final burning questions? Any last comments you'd like to make? Jim, I'm really curious, what do you see as being, kind of Chase's biggest priorities on inclusion in the year ahead? And what any final or parting thoughts for our audience today?
Well, we have an excellent leader in Brian Lamb, who came over from Fifth Third Bank about a year ago. And he's done an excellent job with putting not only disability inclusion on the map more so, but we're finding out ways to deliver equity to the under or disadvantaged groups that we have in a process sort of way. The bank is allocating funds for housing, for homes, ownership, jobs, and there's a deliberate approach by all of my sister organizations, the GLBT group, the Black, the Hispanic, the Asian, folks with disabilities. And now, because we're all under one umbrella, we're working together, and we cross-promote each other's areas. So you may meet a Black guy in a wheelchair one day, or a woman who's Asian and, something else, who's blind in another place. So you find out that the intersectionality always exists, but you have to look for it. So when I looked at all the representative groups when I got here, I Googled a bunch of stuff, and I found out there's about anywhere from 25 to 30% of people with disabilities in every group. But you don't see them in the women's group in our meetings or when we recruit, because the people with disabilities are less than in terms of being welcomed into society. Imagine going to school with a wheelchair, or being blind, or with canes, or whatever it is. If you could get through school, you're lucky. I am thankful in one way that I broke my neck after I got my master's degree, because I probably would have never gotten it after that or before that. So those are the trials and tribulations that we have with disability inclusion.
Definitely. All right. Well, I don't see any more audience questions, and I've asked everything I wanted to ask, and I think that was a really wonderful parting thought to leave with our audience today. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much to our interpreter and our captionist, as well as to Eric for providing behind the scenes support. Thank you everyone who joined us today. Again, this has been, our webinar for this week of the 31st anniversary of the ADA. Delighted to have you all here. Delighted to have Jim showcase his leadership. Follow him on the relevant platforms, keep Chase in the news, and look for more webinars coming up in the months ahead as this work continues and we get back to school, we get back to work, and we get into the wild and wonderful future of the post-COVID world. So thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.